Be my little baby. One of the most famous songs of the Ronnettes. Who were the Ronnettes? Two sisters and their cousin. Ronnie and her older sister Estelle and their cousin Nedra. And the name the Ronnettes is formalized with their three names. Ronnie, Estelle, and Nedra. Ronnettes. They were one of the most famous groups in the 50s. They were so famous that when the Beatles came to America in 1964, they wanted the Ronnettes to tour with them. But in 1968, when the Rolling Stones came to America, the Ronnettes were so famous that the Rolling Stones actually opened for them. Can you imagine? The Rolling Stones opened for the Ronnettes because the Ronnettes were more famous than the Rolling Stones in the late 60s. The Ronnettes, how did they get started? Well, they called every record company in America. You need a group, you need singers, and they were turned down until they found Phil Spector. Phil Spector was a genius. He was the most famous and most important producer of the 50s. He had other girl groups, the Shirelles, the Crystals, Dusty Springfield, Cher. Yes, Cher began with Phil Spector. So Phil Spector launched the Ronnettes. So when he first met them, he fell in love with their music, but he also fell in love with Ronniespector. So Phil Spector was actually engaged to be married, met Ronnie, fell madly in love, called off his wedding, and 2 years later married Ronnie Bennett, who became Ronniespector. But the marriage was far from happy. So they adopted 3 children, but he was, as she later said in her biography, he was abusive, he was violent, tortured her physically and mentally. So how do I know all these things, my darlings? Well, my mother grew up with the Ronnettes. Yes, she grew up in Harlem. They grew up in the Washington Heights. And so she told me all these things about them. And I had the honor of meeting the Ronnettes. I actually spent an Easter lunch with them. I have a picture with me and Estelle and Ronnie's mother. Her name was Bibi, taken about 100 years ago. I'm old, skinny. I was in high school. And that's how I know these little things about the Ronnettes. So my mother told me that when men met Ronniespector, they fell in love with her. And who was in love with her? Well, everyone from Eddie Money, famous singer in the 80s, to Keith Richards, John Lennon, Bruce Springsteen, to name a few. You met Ronniespector, beautiful, sexy, just full of life, so fun to be with. Men just fell in love with her. And everyone who met her loved her because she was so positive and optimistic. And that's why I wanted to make this video in tribute to Ronniespector. So Veronica Yvette Bennett, that's her real name, married Phil Spector, became Ronniespector. They adopted 3 children. So Phil Spector was a genius. He wrote many popular songs. He wrote many of the songs the Ronnettes sang. But he was almost a monster, let's say, as a person. A very abusive and violent person. And also with money. So he paid the Ronnettes, it was later found, 3% of their earnings. So while they were traveling around America, traveling around Europe, touring with the Beatles, touring with the Rolling Stones, they were paid pennies. So in 2000, Veronica Yvette Bennett, Phil Spector's wife, sued him for all the money, all the earnings, all the royalties they should have had. And then 10 years later, 2010, she won. Veronica Yvette Bennett, Ronniespector won her case, and they won $2.8 million. And I heard the other groups, Crystals and Terrells, they got a cut also because they also worked for pennies. He had performers touring around, singing, making albums, using their music for movies and paying them pennies. Well, thank God, Ronniespector did find love. In 1982, she married Jonathan Greenfield and had 2 children with him. The second love of her life. Because yes, she did love Phil Spector. She said he was the love of her life. She admired him. The first 2 years was wonderful. He treated her like a queen. But then he kept her closed up in the house like a prisoner. In fact, she got away by running away, by breaking the window of their home and escaping, barefoot, escaping out of the house where he kept her a prisoner. Anyway, thank God in 1982 she married Jonathan Greenfield and actually died in his arms. So I'm just so glad that in the end she did find love and happiness. This video is for you, my Ronette fans, and a tribute to Ronniespector, who died this year, 2021, at the age of 78, in the arms of her loving husband, Jonathan Greenfield. Unfortunately, her older sister, Estelle, died a few years ago. Living is still Nedra, her cousin, Nedra Talley, who was fortunate, lucky in love. She married a DJ in the 60s, and they are still happily married. They have 2 children. The Ronnettes, Ronniespector, the love for their music will never die. People are still enjoying their songs. Be My Baby is sung in so many films and commercials. And actually, they're making a film of the life of the Ronnettes. And Zendaya, the famous model and actress, will play the part of Ronniespector. Hope you enjoyed my video. Share with your friends. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Be my little baby. Ciao for now.